Everyone.
Good afternoon.
While you enjoy your lunch, we're going to go ahead and get our program started. And delighted to welcome a terrific journalist from this area, but I think what really I enjoy the most about working in my friendship with Monica Robbins is what she does outside her work at Channel 3. A Pittsburgh native, Monica Robbins graduated from West Virginia. She's a mountaineer. And then started her career at a couple of television stations in West Virginia before heading to Columbus, and then ultimately coming to Cleveland 14 years ago. So Monica is the senior health correspondent, and if you have not had the opportunity to see some of her specials, which have aired nationally, they've been featured nationally. Her Medical Miracle series from the Cleveland Clinic, which has received extensive national coverage, but also an anchor, also a reporter, has received quite a few Emmy Award nominations. This is someone who is really a treasure. I consider a treasure to us here in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio, because not only of her coverage of what is our #1 industry, healthcare, but also her terrific work on Channel 3 as a news person. I think she really does a terrific job. But outside of what Monica Robbins does at Channel 3 is what she's going to speak to us a little bit about today. She's a healthcare advocate, and she's going to speak to us a little bit on, as she calls it, caring for the caregiver. And this is someone who really puts her money where her mouth is. Her volunteer work here locally with Susan G. Komen Race for the Cure, with the Diabetes Association, with the Kids in Flight program, and with her doggies, with Therapy Dogs International, I think really speak volumes to what she does outside of work. Also outside of work, these are the other things I love about Monica Robbins. She rides a Harley. She's in several rock and roll bands, which our pastor is very excited about, lead singer in several bands, and she's also a big hockey fan. So a lot of things going for her. So please, a warm Old Stone welcome for our speaker today, Monica Robbins.
Thank you very much, and thank all of you for asking me to be here. This is something I really truly enjoy doing because I feel like I get so much information. For me to have a chance to impart some of that information I don't get to put on television is really rewarding for me. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. And is that wireless?
Right under the light.
Okay. I know how to turn these on. I've used one of these once or twice. Anyway, you know, my name is Monica. I am the health reporter at Channel 3 News. And yes, I'm from Pittsburgh, so you guys didn't get an opportunity. Oh, I have, like, fans. That's awesome. I'm usually booed. So, but anyway, prior to coming here, as Dave was telling you, for 10 years prior to coming to Cleveland, I was an investigative journalist. And I chased bad guys. And I covered crime and government corruption, and I'm anxiously awaiting the DeMora verdict, as many of you probably are as well, to see what happens. But anyway, that's what I did, and honestly, I have to tell you, I didn't expect to live to see 50. My job was often dangerous. There were no cell phones back then, so I carried a pager everywhere. And then I was fortunate enough to get picked up by NBC, who decided they were going to make me their Midwest correspondent. And they sent me all over the country to cover national news. So for example, I was on my way to Cuba, and I believe it was 1997, to cover the Pope's first visit there, and the Lewinsky scandal broke. And I was rerouted back to Washington, D.C. Literally, I had to keep two suitcases packed at all times, one for warm weather, one for cold weather. And it was the middle of January, and I really wanted to go to Cuba. And I didn't have that opportunity. I had 45 minutes to get back home, switch suitcases, and get back to the airport. And every time I went somewhere, I never knew how long I was going to be there. I never knew really what the story was. I would have a courier meet me at the gate. This was obviously pre-9/11. And they would give me my assignment, tell me who my crew was, and I was off. So 10 days in Washington, D.C., standing on the mall in the middle of the snow, freezing, and her name had to be Monica. You know. Well, anyway, I did that for about a year and a half, and I was really fortunate because what I did, I worked for all of the NBC affiliates. So I not only was doing work for, occasionally Nightly would let me be on their air, but typically I worked for every NBC station in the country, and what that meant was wherever I would be, I would stand there for hours and report, and every station who wanted to take my report would say, okay, so Judd and Ramona, which was way back then, in Cleveland, that's who you're going to talk to, and then you're going to talk to Bill and Sue in DC, and then you're going to talk to Jim and Sarah in Florida. And then you have to understand, you have to stand there for time zones. So I had to wait, and depending on how big the story was the longer you stood there. So typically it was 4 hours out in the cold, or in the middle of a flood, or a hurricane, or it was never good news. It was never anything you wanted to be at. But anyway, I was up for a job in New York, DC, Miami, and LA. And I really wanted that DC job because DC was the pipeline at the time to the network in New York. And so I was so excited. I really thought my career was off and running. And then I had some time, and typically, just so you understand, I was on the road 3 weeks out of the month. I lived in hotels. I missed my dog. I missed my bed. And after a while, but I really thought this is where my career needed to be. So I had an opportunity to go home and see my dad. And my dad at the time was living alone in Pittsburgh. And he had been diagnosed with diabetes a few years earlier. And I went home and I realized that there were 5 months of bills sitting on the table that hadn't been touched, including the mortgage that I had co-signed. And then I noticed tons and tons and tons of magazines and tchotchkes and everything that I didn't understand why this was in the house. And then my dad would repeatedly ask me the same question over and over and over again. And I realized, uh-oh, there's a big problem. And so I went back to work. I was trying to figure out, what do I do? My dad, of course, he was Ukrainian, very obstinate, very stubborn, and it was always his way or the highway, and I was always reminded of that. And you have to understand, I left home at 18. My parents were both immigrants, and they didn't understand that just because you go to college, I was the first in the family to go to college. And they didn't get the fact that just because you go to college doesn't mean you're guaranteed a job. So, but it was my mindset that I had to have a job before I left college. So fortunately for me, I was lucky enough that I started working in the industry my junior year. And the station actually hired me and then threw me on TV. But anyway, I heard the groans, so you all kind of understand where I'm coming from with this. I go back to work, and I get sent to Lancaster, Ohio, for a guy who actually got busted out in Las Vegas for having a carload full of anthrax. And long story short, I'm standing outside doing a live shot, and all of a sudden Cleveland wants a hit from me, so I do a hit for Cleveland, and it was Judd and Ramona. And about 30 minutes after I was off the air, I get a phone call in the satellite truck. And I go in, and it was Cleveland saying, hey, when can you be here for an interview? We want to hire you. Now, that's never happened to me before. It's always been really difficult for me. You know, this job is, it's showbiz to an extent. It's very difficult to find work. And they wanted to hire me after one live shot that I did for them. So I was incredibly fortunate. I happened to have the next day off. I jumped in the car. I came to Cleveland. And honestly, I'm from Pittsburgh. Cleveland was not where I wanted to be. However, I am a firm believer that whatever power you believe in puts you in a place where you need to be at that certain time. And Cleveland was not about to leave, Channel 3 was not about to let me leave without accepting a job. And I thought about it, believe me, I tried to get hired in Pittsburgh and they wouldn't hire me. And Cleveland was 2.5 hours away from my dad's house. So I snatched that job and I thought, okay, I'm only going to be here for a couple of years and I'm just going to be here long enough to take care of my dad, and then I'm going to get back on the train heading to hopefully DC or the network. Yeah, that was 14 years ago. I came to Cleveland and right away, and bear in mind, I knew nothing about health. I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. I knew nothing. You could put me in a room, seriously, with a serial killer, and I could do an interview easier than I could do one with a doctor. So I ended up coming here, and literally they looked around the room and said, "We need a health reporter, you." And I'm like, what? And I chase bad guys, I'm a tough girl. And they said, yeah, no, you need to cover health. So that's how I started doing this. Well, then at the same time I thought, ding, your dad's not well. I started a series called Coping with Care. Because after a while, my father's illness seriously progressed. And he was getting worse. His diabetes was unmanaged. No matter how often I tried, he wasn't taking his insulin. And I would even mark the bottle in the fridge and come home and it wouldn't have been touched. And it was incredibly difficult. And he was already exhibiting signs of Alzheimer's disease. And every time I went home, I truly expected to find him dead. That's how bad things were. So what I was doing at that time, I was lucky enough that they had me working night shifts. So I worked 3 to 11:30. So 3 or 4 days a week, I would get in the car at 4 o'clock in the morning. I would drive to Pittsburgh. I would take my dad to his doctor's appointments. I would do his grocery shopping. And then I would jump back in the car and be back to Cleveland by the time my 3 o'clock shift started. I would work until 3 to typically midnight. And then I would jump in the car back at 4 o'clock in the morning and do it again the next day. This went on for about 2.5 years. And I am the poster child for stress. I gained 25 pounds. I was irritable constantly. If you looked at me the wrong way, I was going to snap at you. I was handling everything wrong. I didn't take care of myself because everything I had to do was involving my father. I had to take care of him. And it really drove me crazy when I would hear people say, "You're such a good daughter." What was I supposed to do? I wanted to move my dad to Cleveland, but I didn't have that kind of money. I couldn't move him here. I couldn't afford care for him. I was fortunate enough that one of my coworkers needed a roommate, and she knew what my situation was, and she was kind enough that she allowed me to live in her house and just pay the utilities. I didn't have to pay rent because she knew I was saving my money to pay for my dad's care, and probably 60% of my paycheck was going toward my dad's care. He wiped out my savings. I eventually put him into assisted living, and then eventually that wore out, and I had to put him into a nursing home. And he still owned, we still owned that house, so I didn't qualify for any of the benefits had he signed the house over earlier. I didn't know. I didn't know to plan ahead. I didn't know to seriously have that talk with my father about sooner or later this is going to happen and we need to be prepared. I didn't do that. So one of the things I'm here to tell you today is if you haven't done so yet, if you haven't talked with your kids about the inevitable, just plan ahead. Because at the time, it no longer became my father's choice, it was mine. And that no child wants to make that decision for their parent. And what's even worse is no child wants to become the parent for their parent. So one of the first things I did was get that healthcare power of attorney. And if you haven't done so yet, I strongly encourage every one of you to do it for yourself and find someone you can sign over healthcare power of attorney. And what that means is in the event that you're incapacitated, there's someone you trust who can make those decisions for you. The other thing is also determine your end-of-life care. And in one of my father's lucid moments, we had that opportunity to talk about that end-of-life care. And he was very adamant about his wishes, that he wanted nothing, no life-saving measures taken at the end. And it was, you know, of course, I didn't want to have that conversation with him. It was heartbreaking, but at the same time, later, thank God I did. It ended up coming to that where my father made that decision. I didn't have to do it, and sure enough, when that time came, his wishes were given. And so that's something incredibly important that I hope all of you take away from this. Another thing, if you are in the event, maybe you have to take care of your parents, or if you're a parent and you know sooner or later your kids are going to have to take care of you, consider that financial power of attorney document. That's something that, now the healthcare power of attorney, you can download that off the internet. You can go to any website and download that document and just fill it out, and if you want to be extra safe, you can get it notarized, but it's not always necessary. But the financial power of attorney, you do have to, I had to have my lawyer put that one together, and that has to be legally sound and everything. So that's something too, because that document, you know, my father's bank accounts, my father was getting scammed by telemarketers. He maxed out 24 credit cards. And at the time, I didn't know any better, and that's where all the tchotchkes were coming from. He bought every magazine, he bought every metal car, you name it, my dad bought it. And he maxed out all of these credit cards. And at the time, it was, you know, he was alone, he was lonely, and, you know, he was taken advantage of. And then somebody came to the house and offered to blacktop his driveway, something that should have cost maybe 60 bucks. He wrote a check for $1,200. We didn't have $1,200 in the bank account. So this person who scammed him, and the worst part about that was he wrote the check for $1,200 and apparently made a mistake, and he wrote a second one and gave them both to this person. And so anyway, so you can imagine that bank account was wiped out. So that's why it's so important that, you know, eventually I took over all of my father's finances. I tried to get the credit card companies to work with me, and I have to tell you, in my experience, you know, sometimes they say they'll work with you. In my experience, they didn't. And they were trying to hold me responsible. I know now that there are recourses you can take, so talk to an attorney if you ever get into a situation like that, or better yet, get in control of someone's finances and get rid of those credit cards before it becomes a nightmare like it did for me. So eventually the one thing that really saved me was my father was a veteran. And I never even thought about benefits because of his service. And so I finally filled out, I'm not kidding, it took me a week to fill out all the paperwork that comes with that. But the Veterans Administration started sending him a check based on his service. And that money saved me. That money suddenly was helping, it just got us by. And so at the time, because my father was in the service, I wanted to move him to Cleveland, and we have a great VA facility here. And I know there's been a lot of talk about how horrible VA care is. Well, from my personal experience, I moved my dad to Brecksville. While it's certainly not the Ritz, that was the best health care he ever received. It was a team-based health care. And every week they had a meeting and I was invited to it, and I could talk to every one of his nurses, I could talk to every one of his doctors, the social workers, everyone. And if I had any concerns, I could share them. If they had concerns to tell me, they could share them with me. It was brilliant. And if you ever have to be in a situation where someone you love is in a hospital setting, that's something you need to ask for, is you want a meeting, be it weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, whatever you need to do. You have every right to ask for that. So anyway, I lost my father in June of 2003, and in the great scheme of things, because I had that healthcare power of attorney, it was a blessing, because he made those decisions for me and I didn't have to do that. And he went very peacefully, and to this day I still talk to him every day, and I know he hears me because I can hear him yelling at me every time I'm speeding down 90. But anyway, that's how I got involved with this caring for the caregiver. Because at the time, I was not taking care of myself at all. And you know, and when you're in that situation, you don't have time. I didn't have time. I couldn't eat right. Maybe I could have, but you know, Dave and I were talking about this earlier. McDonald's is at every exit. You know, it was so convenient. And then, I don't know about you, but you know, when I'm stressed out, I need comfort food. So I was going for the cheeseburger every time I could, and that, no doubt, that and the added stress, kicking up the cortisol in my system, helped me gain that 25 pounds. And it wasn't until my father died that I took a good hard look in the mirror and realized, I think I seriously lost years off my life because of what I took care of my father for 5 years. I'm not kidding you. I lost at least 5 years off my life because of how unhealthy I was. I never exercised. I don't have time. I didn't eat right. I don't have time. Well, let me tell you something. You cannot take care of someone else if you don't take care of yourself. There is no shame in self-love. And that is the most important lesson I had to learn. That you need to take care of yourself. Because please don't be like I was. And I understand more than anybody how stressful those situations can be, but I want you to know there are things you can put into place now that you can kind of alleviate some of that stress. One of the things I had done was I pre-planned my father's funeral. And while at the time that was a horrible thing to deal with, it was a terrible thing to discuss, I took care of it, and wouldn't you know, when the time came, I made one phone call and everything was taken care of. And that was one bill I didn't have to pay. It had already been taken care of. It was paid for. So those are some of the things. I want to talk to the ladies in the audience right now, because often we're the nurturers, we're the ones who are too busy taking care of everybody else that we don't take care of ourselves. And then all of a sudden one day, we feel like this horrible indigestion, or this weird jaw pain, or we have a headache and feel a weird sense of doom for some reason. And no one ever told us that those are signs of a heart attack. So I'm telling you now, those are signs of a heart attack. Know your family history, and if you know that you may be potentially at risk for something like that, indigestion, jaw pain, that terrible sense of doom, raging headache that won't go away, yeah, you may have that tightness in your chest, but the typical signs and symptoms that people always hear about, the pain in the left arm, the tightness in the chest. Sometimes in women, those don't happen. So if you feel something odd that isn't going away, please take it seriously and just go get checked at the doctor. They'll do an EKG. If you're having a heart attack, they're gonna know, and they're gonna fix you. And I can't tell you how many times I've heard these stories from people I've met who told me that mom was complaining about that for days and didn't do anything. She was having a heart attack. So, gentlemen, bring you back into the conversation. You now have heard this. Make sure you listen to your women. If you hear them talking about that, don't let her tell you, oh honey, I'll be fine. You put her in the car and you take her down to Metro or wherever you need to. Take those symptoms seriously. Obviously, if you had a whole bunch of tacos the night before, or you have some reason to feel that horrible heartburn or indigestion, that may be a little common sense. But if you don't, pay attention to that. Something else, and I'm fortunate that I didn't experience that, but today many women and men not only have to take care of all the business in the house, they also have to take care of all the nurturing. We have to have those emotional resources available to give love to the spouses and the children. And you've all heard that analogy. When you're in a plane, make sure you put your oxygen mask on first before you help someone else. It applies to everything in your life. It truly does. You've got to save yourself before you work on saving other people, because if you're useless, you're useless. You can't help anyone. Millions of us struggle with those negative body images. I fessed up. I told you, yeah, I gained 25 pounds. Everyone who meets me says, oh, you're so much thinner in person than you are on TV. Or, I didn't realize TV added that much weight. Well, yeah, I'm like 600 pounds heavier on TV than I am. I'm also 6'4". So, yes, I'm short. So, that's something else you need to be aware of. We all, most of us, we all can stand to lose 5-10 pounds. Okay, everybody has a problem with that. Believe me, I can probably lose 20. I've gone through that stress thing recently again, because I had a friend recently who I lost to pancreatic cancer, and I went through that same situation, but this time, while my weight crept up, my stress level, I did have it a little bit more under control. I did yoga. I went to the gym 3 days a week. I did my best because I knew I can't let myself lose my mind like I did with my dad. But yeah, we all gain weight. I'm a sugar addict. I fall off the wagon all the time. I know the rules. We all know the rules. Eat more veggies. Eat less. Exercise more. There's truth to that. It's difficult. It takes 3 weeks. 3 weeks to form a habit. And it's something you need to do. For me, I'm one of those people that if I put my mind to something, I can't cheat. I cannot cheat. I have to do it every single day, 100%. I cannot cheat. And once I do that, then I can get back into control. So after my father died, the diabetes thing really scared me. And the fact that I'm a total sugar addict. You put gummy bears in front of me, look out. And so one of the things I did was I cut sugar out of my diet. And I learned, and now I look at sugar now, and I'm not perfect, believe me, because I fall off the wagon. I said, I am an addict. But now when I eat sugar, I don't feel so good afterward. I pay attention to what it does. Sugar is an inflammatory. So if you're feeling like your joints are aching, or you just don't feel so good, chances are, I'm betting you had some sugar. And you know where you get sugar? white bread. You get sugar from pasta. You get sugar from what's called simple carbohydrates. So one of the things you can do to limit your sugar sources, in addition to the gummy bears and the regular pop and all that fun stuff, is to start eating more complex carbohydrates. And what that means, I tell people all the time, stop eating everything white. White rice, white pasta, white potatoes. The only thing you can eat that's white is cauliflower. Okay? That's it. Everything else, try to limit. But it doesn't mean you can't eat those foods anymore. Switch from white rice to brown rice. Switch from white bread to whole grain bread. Switch from white potatoes to sweet potatoes. They're better. And something else you might want to bear in mind. How many of you try to watch your sugar intake and you maybe drink Diet Pop? Okay. I drink Diet Pop. I like the Coke Zero. That's my favorite right now. But I try not to drink it. That's a treat to me. To me, that's like putting the bowl of gummy bears in front of me. And one of the reasons I'm saying that is because when you like to drink those sweet things, even though you think it's Splenda or you think it's something different, if you're drinking the sweet things, it makes your body crave more sweet. So it's a lot harder to turn down that piece of cheesecake later. So it's something that you can get control of just by making smarter choices. And when you start getting away from that sweet stuff and you start eating naturally sweet stuff like strawberries and melon and oranges and healthy foods like that, you get a different sweet craving. And you can taste it, and the next time you try that Diet Coke or the Coke, now it's, for me, if I drink a Diet Coke, it tastes like chemicals. I can't do it anymore. Now for me, when I drink that Coke Zero, it's too sweet. I can't handle it anymore. And that's one of the things you can do to get control. You also, of course, want to go for those antioxidants. So whole foods. Whole foods, if it has been processed, it is no longer whole. And what that means is anything that comes in a box or a bag or plastic is not a whole food unless it's grapes in a bag, okay? You all know what I'm talking about. If it was made in a manufacturing plant, even if it says healthy on it, doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy. It also means that they probably added a ton of salt to it. They've also added a ton of sugar to it. How many of you love those? It's fat-free. Well, to make it taste good, it may be fat-free, but it's not sugar-free. They added a ton of sugar to that stuff to make it taste good. So those are some of the things that you seriously want to consider before, to sort of watch what your diet and your exercise level is. So those are empty calories. Let's cut out the empty calories, start eating whole food. And it's okay to eat 6 times a day. Yay! Eat every 3 hours. Doesn't mean you have to eat an entire meal. It means you can have a yogurt and an apple, or a piece of string cheese, and a handful of raw almonds. That kind of stuff. If you eat every 3 hours, you're not going to be hungry. And also, if you switch to those complex carbohydrates, they take longer to digest in your stomach. So you feel fuller longer, and you're not craving food. I'm also hypoglycemic thanks to my sugar addiction. So when my sugar crashes, get out of my way, I'm heading for a Snickers. But that's what my body tells me I need. Now I'm to the point where when my sugar starts, I try to avoid my sugar crashing in the first place, but when I do, I go for something protein, like a chicken breast or something. Something else I want to talk to you about is your health information. It's really important you're getting your health information from a reliable source, and we've got great resources right here in town. But how many of you get those emails that say, tell everyone you know, metal hangers cause breast cancer? Or there was this guy who knew this guy whose girl's cousin was the second related to so-and-so, and you need to tell them that deodorant causes breast cancer. Those chain emails every day, I'm not kidding you. I get spammed with them, and I get people asking me, is this true, is this true, is this true? There's a great resource called Snopes, SNOPES.com. Snopes.com. It's an urban legend debunker. And you can go on that website, if you get one of those crazy emails, and search it. They even have a health section where you can search all of those things that everybody tells you is bad for you. The one that really scared me was that you can stop someone by having a heart attack if you tell them to cough. No. Call 911. Okay? Just saying. Call 911. So if you're going to get your health information, because it's everywhere, you're going to get it at the salon, you're going to get it at the dentist office, you're going to get it from your friends, off the TV, wherever, make sure you're getting it from a reliable source. Make sure it's an attributed source to some medical institution that is well known and respected. If you've never heard of it, chances are it's probably not always dependable information. So, something else you don't want to do is don't become a cyberchondriac. How many of you go to WebMD every time you don't feel well? You know you do, come on. I do, you know, I diagnose myself all the time. I'm not saying that's a bad idea. It's great to go to your doctor armed with information. There's nothing wrong with that. But what bothers me most is that people will look something up and they think they have this thing because all the symptoms match. And that's not necessarily it. So they don't go to their doctor because they think, oh, this is what I have. Case in point. And I'll use me as the horrible example. Last October, we had a bad windstorm and my porch furniture blew off the deck. So I went to pick up the chase lounge that had blown off the deck, and the back of it came down and cracked me on my nose. Broke my nose. Yeah, I'm not going to get into gory details, but if any of you have ever broken a nose, you know how nasty it is. So I go upstairs, I show my husband, who the first thing out of his mouth was, I didn't do that. Yeah, I know. Then he started laughing at me. He's like, oh, you're going to have raccoon eyes, and you're going to, you know, it's going to take forever. And he's like, you know, you should probably go to a doctor to see if there's anything they can do. Well, I'm the health reporter. I looked it up, and I know there's nothing they can do for a broken nose until the swelling goes down. They can't reset it until the swelling goes down. I know this. So what do? I go to work. And I had to do 3 live shots. And the weird thing was, I was in tremendous pain, but I thought, I'll just put my glasses on, no one will notice. And I made the camera guy stay way back. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't remember. I'm ad-libbing now. That's what I do. That day, I had to have a piece of paper in front of me because I couldn't remember what I was supposed to talk about. And and I also felt really nauseous. And of course I had a headache. Well, duh, I got hit in the face with a chase lounge. So I go back into the newsroom, and everyone kept coming over to my desk going, you don't look so good, you should go to the doctor. I know, I broke my nose, there's nothing you can do about it, blah, blah. WebMD says, blah, blah, blah. No, really, you should go to the doctor. So finally, I'm like, okay, fine. When your boss kicks you out and makes you go to the doctor, you go to the doctor. So here I am sitting in the emergency room, and I knew, you know how long you have to wait in the emergency room. So I have my iPad, and I'm playing computer games and checking my email and trying to get some work done. And the doctor comes in, and he does the flashlight thing, and he's looking at my eyes, and all of a sudden he gets this weird look on his face, and I'm like, he recognized me. He knows who I am, he's nervous. And Yeah, no. He asked me a question. He goes, you know what, don't answer it right now, I'll be right back. I'm gonna run down the hall for something, but tell me the answer when I get back. So I'm like, okay. So I go back to playing with my iPad. The nurse comes in and she says, come on, we're taking you down for a CT scan. I'm like, a CT, I broke my nose, it's not a big deal. She's like, no, come on, let's go, we're going for a CT scan. We're walking down the hall and I realize I can't walk straight. I'm having trouble walking. And now I have been upright since 8:30 that morning. I've never really laid down, so when they laid me down on that thing, holy cow, this stuff in your face, my entire face hurt. It was tremendously painful. They do the CT scan. You know, I go back to the room, I'm sitting there and back on my iPad, and the doctor comes in and he takes my iPad away from me. And he looks at me and he says, what was the answer to that question? And I looked at him and said, what question? I didn't remember him asking me anything. And then he says, yeah, you have a hairline fracture in your skull. You have a tremendously bad concussion. And I'm looking at him like, no, I don't. He goes, your eyes are bouncing. He goes, your one eye isn't moving. Your pupils are dilated and not moving. So when Colt McCoy got whacked by James Harrison and everyone was like, oh, but he felt fine, he was more concerned about his hand, I can totally relate to that. Because I thought it was fine. I really did. And it wasn't until later I realized I had every telltale symptom of concussion and I ignored it. Because I was so concerned about, I broke my nose. So that's my example of don't believe everything you read, and if you seriously think you have a problem, go see an expert. Now when you get to that expert, let's be realistic, there's a nursing shortage. How many of you get 30 minutes or more with your doctor? Yeah, no. How many of you get maybe 3 minutes with your doctor? Yeah, that's typical. So what I suggest you do, because their time is so valuable and obviously so is yours, take a tape recorder, take a notebook, take something with you that you can record everything that doctor says. And if they tell you that, I'm sorry, you can't tape this or you can't write this down, and also write all the questions down before you go, then tell them, yeah, you're fired, because you can't fire your doctor. All right. I have a feeling we're out of time, and I just realized what time it was. I'm sorry I took up so much of your time, folks, but thank you.
How about a nice hand for Monica Brown?